Well, Bill Whittle has said that President Trump won the 2016 election because the pollsters thought that only likely voters were going to show up and unlikely voters showed up, and that's why they were all so wrong. I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. And Bill, there's a new poll that was actually done in 2019 by the Knight Foundation that shows that a large chunk of persistent non-voters and eligible unregistered people, about half of them say that they absolutely intend to turn out for the 2020 presidential election, and they're absolutely certain that they'll be there. But Bill, it was interesting. It's not a clear-cut advantage to one party or the other. In fact, about half of them said that they were absolutely going to turn out and vote for President Trump, and the others are going to absolutely turn out and vote for whoever the Democrat nominee is. Just on a broad scale, and we'll drill down on this in a second, but on a broad scale, what difference, if any, does it make if we get more people to show up?
I just felt the scientific part of my brain kick in. If more people show up and they vote exactly the same way as they would vote if there were fewer people, in other words, if the increased sample breaks down precisely the way as the pre-increased sample did, then it makes no difference whatsoever.
Now, what I didn't see in that bill, by the way, was a state-by-state breakdown, which could theoretically make a huge difference given that the Electoral College is the way that we choose a president.
Yeah, but I don't believe that this – half of the story – you could say that the thesis makes sense, my thesis anyway, the Trump thesis makes sense. And then when you say that it doesn't matter which party – then you actually get into some complications. So let me just kind of rephrase all of this. I think in 2016, as I said, unlikely voters showed up for Trump, people who had never considered themselves likely voters, many of whom, as you point out, had never voted before but were eligible. Many hadn't voted since 1988 or 84. And Donald Trump activated those people and brought them out in enough numbers to win the election, which is why it surprised so many people who count likely voters. Unlikely voters showed up. If this study says that a large number of those people who were activated in 2016 are going to show up in 2020 or swear that they're going to, then my theory says that the reason that they're going to do that is because Donald Trump not only lived up to their expectations but fulfilled them.
Well, what I took from this survey, Bill, was not necessarily that people who showed up for the first time in 2016, but these are people who just haven't showed up yet.
Are going to show up now.
Yes.
Well, so then they become likely voters again, right? I guess it doesn't really matter until the actual votes are counted. Everybody always talks about coming to the polls. There's very few people that, if you got polled by one of these services and they said, are you going to show up in 2020? There's very few people say, no, I don't care.
Now, that's the interesting thing. You just put your finger on what I thought should have been the headline of the story. In the midst of perhaps the most vigorously political era that we've ever lived through, where more and more people are tuned into politics, where it just seems to consume the national dialogue and your conversations in the marketplace, nevertheless, half of the people who are unmotivated voters or unregistered eligible people who could vote have still said, nah.
This brings up all kinds of really interesting issues. And one of them, I think one of the most interesting issues in this entire, I don't know, let's just pick a common sense country term like milieu.
What country?
Yeah, well, I was in Australia for an election in 1998. And in Australia, you're required by law to vote. You're penalized if you don't. You pay a pretty steep penalty. And they were bragging about that. They were very proud of that. They're talking about their turnout rates being very high and how this was a real democracy instead of what we had in America, our sham democracy and so on. And I gave this some serious thought. And I think where I came down on was I kind of came back down on the freedom part again, which is in a free country, if you don't want to vote, then don't. You are aware of what voting does. You're not unaware of the fact that by going out and casting a vote, you're going to determine the people who determine your future. But there's something about compelled voting that bothers me in the way that compelled everything else bothers me. So I just wanted to get that said because of the number of people that, no, I'm just not going to vote. Okay. You can say I'm not going to vote and therefore I don't get any of the blame. but that's not true. Your vote or not vote determines the outcome. And if you don't want to vote, that's your business. That's the way I look at it. Now, back to the issue. Large numbers of people who hadn't voted before came out and voted for Donald Trump, and they only voted for Donald Trump because they had seen Mitt Romney and John McCain, and before that, Bush and so on, that they had not seen anything that looked like something different. Let's not even call the word conservative or anything. They had not seen a non-politician. And these people who came out for Trump in 2016, and I know many of them, because I correspond with a number of them, people who were utterly disgusted with the political process to the point where they were absolutely apathetic. They didn't think it mattered who won. And if you look at the subsequent votes of both Mitt Romney and John McCain, you can make a pretty compelling case that they were right. Now, along comes Donald Trump, who's something different. You don't have to say he's better or good, or you don't have to like him, whatever, but he's without question different. I don't think there's much doubt about that. And that brought out a lot of people whose cynicism level was so high that they simply had to just abandon the entire idea of democracy and thought both parties pretty much the same. It's not going to matter what I do. So I'm just going to sit here and enjoy my life as best I can and try and stay as far away from politics as I can. So far, so good. Now, if the statement that you're making is that a lot of people said that they never voted before either, but now they're going to come out and vote this time, and it doesn't break down like they're all Trump voters, both Democrats and Republicans are saying, no, this time I'm really going to come out. That's just an assertion. It's not an action. What happened in 2014 was an action. And if you're telling me that this latest study actually went out and surveyed unlikely voters, and that's now they're more likely to vote. Again, the dim part of my brain that deals with methodology says, well, if they were unlikely voters, that means they were not polled too often in the past. And if they're being polled now, they're saying what most people would say to a pollster, which is, yes, of course I'll come out. I don't know if that really means anything. Well, I'll tell you what does mean something, though, and I'm serious about this. There's a difference between action and words, and it's a very big difference, and maybe never so big a difference as in the case of political opinion versus political action. Everybody talks about coming out for the vote. You ask Democrats across the country, you ask every single Democrat you ever want to poll if they're going to come out in 2020, and especially if you phrase it like, are you going to come out in 2020 to stop Donald Trump? They'll all say yes. Every one of them would say yes. And the thing about it that's most interesting is almost all of them genuinely believe it. But what matters is what people actually do. What do they do with their time? And now we're into territory where, since we're in the primaries already, there's actual data. We're no longer talking about what you say you're going to do. Now we're talking about what did you do or have you done? And where I find this to be interesting and extremely encouraging is Donald Trump's rallies are huge and contain anecdotally, but anecdotal evidence is not it's not the best evidence, but it's not no evidence either. Anecdotally, large numbers of Democrats who never, ever thought they would have voted for Trump, despise Donald Trump, are starting to show up at these rallies simply only because, not because they suddenly feel conservative, they suddenly feel that Donald Trump is a swell guy, but because the Democrats have left them with no option whatsoever. And these people do care about politics enough to get out of the house and go. Some of them have gone to Trump rallies. Some of them have probably gone just to find out how disgusting they really are, and have found out to their surprise that they're actually pretty cool people there. So what do the numbers show? Not the questions, not the polls. What do people's actions show?
Well, and I think you're correct, Bill, that the words don't mean anything with this proviso, as I indicated before, because in 2016, which I hadn't mentioned, in 2016, 100 million eligible adults who could have voted in the presidential election between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, did not vote. And this time around, while half of these chronic non-voters and unregistered people who could be eligible to vote have said, yes, they're absolutely certain they're going to vote, half of them said no. And so we still have this country where you think, and I think, because we're doing these political chat shows 10 times a week, that this is the most crucial thing that's ever faced the republic. And yet somehow, last time around, we had 100 million people who just didn't show up. And this time around, we'll probably have tens of millions, if not 100 million more. How is it possible that it just doesn't matter to so many people? I mean, they're saying I'm not coming.
No, I see your point. Well, there's a bigger answer to this. Let me just deal with the kind of the in the data answer that appears to me. In 2016, a lot of people thought, virtually everybody was so sure that Hillary Clinton was going to win the look. If you hear poll after poll after poll after poll after poll saying that Hillary Clinton, just as an example, I'm just making up numbers here, that Hillary Clinton has a 50-point lead, and there's essentially no way she can lose this election. It doesn't matter whether you're a Hillary supporter or a Trump supporter. If you hear that kind of information often enough, you are far less likely to go because you're utterly convinced that it's a futile act. And now it turned out that in 2016, certainly some significant percentage of Democrats were overconfident to the degree where they were sure she was going to win. And Trump supporters came out in big numbers and so on. What people may be saying this year is that they're saying that Trump looks so strong they don't think he's going to come out. I don't know the answer to this stuff, Scott, which is why I don't put any real faith in polls at all. I really just think that they're more like it's more like one of these morality games like Balderdash than an actual piece of scientific predictive data who's going to show up. It's more like a morality test. Are you going to vote? Yes. I'm not. Yes.
And I agree with that. So let me try a little exercise here. Let's just accept the premise that there are a bunch of people who are previously chronic non-voters and unregistered people who would have otherwise been eligible to vote who now get activated. And let's just say that however many people, but it's half the people who were surveyed. Now, so there's this whole pool of people who at least profess that they are absolutely certain they're going to vote. What first of all, do you think it could make a difference if for example, Republican Party got a little hustle and a little muscle on the streets and decided to get out there and try to reach these people? And secondly, what's the message that you personally would take to a chronic non-voter that says not only this time it's worth your vote, but this time it's worth casting a vote in the way I think you should cast the vote?
It seems to me that ground game, right? All of this, voter drives, picking up people, reminding them, Facebook messages, the whole thing, which the Democratic Party tends to do much better than the Republicans do. It seems to me that is a function of lack of enthusiasm from people who are not motivated to vote in the first place and are either being prodded into it or it's being made so easy for them that they might not otherwise have do it. But it's a marginal kind of a thing. I don't think that's what really determines historical elections like the ones in 2016. I think I'm getting to 2020. The 2016 election was perceived by conservatives to be basically the last chance. And I think that's a perfectly accurate way of looking at it. So in answer, I'll get to what I would say to people in a second, but in answer to your question, what seems to be happening from the numbers is that Donald Trump's numbers, I'm talking about people that have shown up for primaries. We've only had 3 of them, and that's not a huge blip, but it's a consistent set of 3 points. What we're finding is that Donald Trump is way overperforming compared to not just former Republicans, but way over, like double, performing what incumbent presidents draw to primary elections.
Fascinating, too, at a time when he absolutely doesn't need them.
Yeah, so let me finish with this. So what the data shows, it's a limited data pool, but what it's showing is that Donald Trump, the incumbent, is turning out in round numbers, but almost perfectly round numbers, really, twice as many voters in his re-election year as incumbents of all the previous elections, Democrat and Republican. He's turning out twice what Obama did in 2012, in other words. That is data that's not an opinion. That is data showing that Republican voters for Trump are, in fact, going out and showing up. And not just showing up, they're showing up in much bigger numbers than they have for any previous incumbent president. And that's actual data that should worry the daylights out of the Democrats. On the other hand, what we're seeing is that while people is obviously very passionate about Bernie Sanders is underperforming against his own numbers. Bernie Sanders' performance in 2020 is 25% down from what it was in 2016. And this is with this entire Donald Trump hatred. This is with the country on the verge of extinction, according to these people. That Donald Trump, the orange man tyranny, is just a few months away, and he's underperforming. All Democrats are underperforming. That is terrifying news if you're a Democrat. So while polls are interesting to the degree that they're polls and there's something to talk about, I don't put any real faith in them. But if you look at if you look at the actual votes that have been physically cast by people who had to physically get out of bed and drive down to a polling station in 2020, what you see so far is that Donald Trump is doing twice as well as any incumbent president in the last 40 years, and that the leaders of the Let's Get Trump Out of Office party, the leading candidates, Bernie Sanders in particular, is underperforming compared to what he did to 2016. Joe Biden, the presumptive frontrunner, has absolutely disappeared and collapsed, and so has Elizabeth Warren. And those are actual numbers that matter. Those numbers make me feel a lot more confident than what polls say. I don't put any confidence in them at all. And what I do put confidence in, I'm starting to like the look up very, 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 very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're grateful for the people who have tuned into this episode of Bill Whittle Now, and it is made possible by our friends, the members at BillWhittle.com. You can join their ranks, unlock new levels of engagement at the website. Things you can't even see now will magically appear once you're logged in as a member, including some backstage content from our Right Angle program, which I think you're really going to enjoy. Some people tell us, some of the members tell us it's their favorite show of the week, and you can't even see it right now. So go to BillWhittle.com and click that Become a Member link. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks for watching.